Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Aparna Vatpe, Faculty of Tata Institute of Social Sciences. In this module, we will be talking about environmentalism in India. This is part of the paper Environment and Society. We will start by addressing the question, is there a divide between nature and culture? Then I will explain the concepts environmentalism of the rich and environmentalism of the poor. Both are seen in world but in different countries. This will be followed by a brief introduction to different environmental movements. We will take examples from India and some from abroad. We will end with the current status of environmentalism in India. Humans have lived on earth for many centuries. We are just like other animals. We started to build houses. We created farms. We created water bodies. And in this way, we started to transform landscapes. This was seen as culture. This was separate from nature. With the advent of technology, we created more and more constructions and sometimes changed the natural environments irreversibly. Human cultures became separate entities. But can we exist without nature? Can human culture be completely separated from nature? This is a question which has been debated by anthropologists, sociologists, and many kinds of biologists. French anthropologist Claude Lévi-Strauss believed strongly that nature and culture are divided. According to him, there existed only two true models of concrete diversity. One on the plane of nature, namely that of diversity of species, and the other on the cultural plane, provided by the diversity of functions. Many researchers argued that nature is dominated by culture. Some cultures view nature as something wild, which is sometimes dangerous and needs to be controlled. In fact, a lot of people talked about taming the nature. But this is not true for all. Some cultures viewed humans as part of nature, linked closely to all the other components of the Earth's ecosystem. Organized religion often put humans above all the other living beings. They also thought that man is the supreme creation of nature. Woman was a little inferior. She was more closer to nature. And therefore, it often advised men to dominate and control nature as well as women. These arguments made people believe that there is a clear divide between nature and culture. But nature and culture divide is not seen in many of the ancient cultures. Indigenous communities, which are closely linked to nature, cannot separate humans and the rest of the world. For them, humans merge seamlessly with plants, animals, and ecosystems. Natural areas and species are part of culture. Forests are viewed as sacred. Some plants and animal species are considered sacred. They are part of the religion. They are also worshipped in many places. Indigenous art forms such as dance, music, drama, weaving, paintings, all include natural elements. They are productions, but they use natural elements for creation as well as creative ideas. If we look at paintings made by Warli, Baiga or Gond artists, this is very clear. In Warli paintings, there are human figures which are doing activities of farming, rice collection, and many others. But at the same time, in the same picture, around the humans are different animals, plants, which are coexisting in the same world. They are inhabiting same areas and living side by side. Coexistence of humans and other life forms is seen in all tribal cultures. There are beliefs among many indigenous communities in Asia, Africa, and South America which do not separate nature and culture. These basic beliefs, along with many other factors, is a reason why the nature conservation movements started by communities are very different than those started by conservation scientists or urban communities. Researchers have shown that environmental movements of the Western countries are different from those of Eastern or African or South American countries. In the past, American historians stated that environmentalism is basically related to the expansion of leisure opportunities. It can be present only in the post-industrial society. They believed that nature is basically a place of enjoyment. It can be enjoyed if the people's basic needs are fulfilled. People will lobby for conservation only if they are sufficiently rich and would like to protect natural sites where they can go and enjoy themselves. This was environmentalism of the rich. It can be seen in most Western or developed countries. In America and Europe, natural areas are protected for aesthetic and pleasure viewing. Tourism to natural areas has grown through this. But a very different picture is seen in the other parts of the world. India, Brazil, Kenya, Malaysia are all developing countries. They all have dominant agrarian society. Industrialization is limited and most people are still living in the poverty. But very strong environmental movements have come forth from these countries. They were led by tribals, farmers, fishermen, artisans. These groups were dependent on nature for their basic livelihood and not for pleasure or for luxury. These movements mainly arose due to conflicts over resources during the early stages of the industrialization process. Europe and North America also faced environmental problems in the early industrial stages. But they overcame these problems through use of technology. Scientific resource management was also helpful. Europe and America faced timber scarcity due to loss of forest. But large-scale plantations were created and that fulfilled the demand for timber. In America, faulty management of land had created problems of dust storms. But very soon, they improved the land management technique, and that ensured that the dust storms did not occur. Rise of environmental friendly technology, alternative technology, has minimized the problems of land degradation and pollution in Western countries. As compared to this, India's industrialization experience has been new and been much more traumatic. Large lands were taken away from people for building of railways, for creating cities and industries. Forests were cut and sold for commercial purposes that deprived people of fuel, fodder, and many of the resources of the forest. Rivers were polluted and biological diversity is lost. Clean water and good food is today available only at a price and therefore can be commanded by the rich alone. There is a rise in social inequality. It is the poor, the lower caste, the tribals, the women who have to live in degraded environments, polluted habitats, and have to struggle harder for their lives. In India, environmental degradation and resource shortages directly threatens livelihood options of people. Environmental protection here is for survival and not for luxury. This is known as environmentalism of the poor. Environmentalism of the poor arose due to unequal distribution of ecological goods and evils resulting from unequal economic growth. It is very distinct from the environmentalism of the rich. The environmentalism of the poor is seen through the rising conflicts for ecological reasons, conflicts over forest, water, land are very common in India today. This type of environmentalism also includes social justice claims. These are made by impoverished populations. The struggles by displaced people were mainly for social justice. These struggles were mainly against the government. They were also against private companies which had the same interests as the government, that was of increased money. People have protested development that threatens their livelihoods and natural resources required to carry out livelihoods. But the struggles go deeper. They are about well-being. They are about well-being of the future generations, protection of culture, and autonomy of decision-making. So far in this module, we tried to look at environmentalism of the rich and environmentalism of the poor, which has perhaps arisen due to the worldview of these two areas. Environmentalism of the poor is what we see all around us in the developing countries. We will now look at some of the prominent environmental movements that arose in the developing countries. The first documented environmental movement in India is the story of Khejadali village. Bishnoi community in Rajasthan strongly believes in the protection of trees, in the protection of vegetation and animals. It is part of their religious tradition. Khejadi tree provides Bishnois with food, fodder, and it is a sacred species for the Bishnois. Long ago, in 1730, the Maharaja of Marwar wanted to cut Khejadi trees around the Bishnoi village. He needed lime for constructing his palace, and for that, he needed Khejadi trees which could be used as fuel. But when the army came to cut the village, one woman, Amrita Devi, stopped them. She was a Bishnoi. She said that it was against her religion to allow cutting of green Khejadi trees. She said that she was willing to die rather than allow cutting of the Khejadi. Saying this, she hugged the tree. The soldiers cut her head. Then her daughters followed, and they also laid down their lives. The news spread, and more Bishnois from surrounding villages came to protect the Khejadi trees. In the end, 363 Bishnois, including men, women, and children, sacrificed their lives for the good of the trees. They wanted to protect the Khejadi for future because they knew its importance. In the end, the king came to know about this. He was ashamed and had to stop cutting. This example has guided many of the tree protection movements in India. Chipko Andolan in Uttarakhand is one prominent example. In the end of the 19th century, Birsa Munda, a leader of the Munda tribe, conducted an armed revolt against the taking over of land and forests by outsiders. These outsiders were supported by the British government. He was caught and tried in court. At the end, he died in prison. Today, Birsa Munda is the symbol of tribal identity, and indigenous peoples still remember him as for his protest against the oppression. In India, ordinary men, women, and even children, tribals, non-tribals, farmers, shifting cultivators, and fishermen are the ones who have risen against the oppressive regimes. Many other examples of environmentalism of the poor can be seen. In the 1970s, Chipko movement in Himalaya also included hugging of trees by villagers. In 1980s, Chico Mendes, a simple rubber tapper in Amazon area, protested against the cutting of Brazilian rainforest. He became a legend. The Ogoni, the Ijaw, and other groups in Nigeria protested against the damage from oil extraction by Shell in the Niger Delta. There was much resistance against eucalyptus plantations in Thailand. The movement of people displaced by dams, protest against agro-industries and biopiracy are all part of this. More recently, the anti-mining stand taken by the tribals Dongri Akons in the Niyamgiri forest of Orissa is one shining example of environmentalism of the poor. There have been many conflicts over natural resources and rights of use. Since the early 20th century, there were conflicts between villagers and forest administration in tribal districts of Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra and Orissa. In Jharkhand, forest conflicts were part of tribal homeland movement. Forest rights issues are today taken up by Nakshal and Maoist movements. Many environmental movements arose in the defense of customary rights. These rights allowed self-governance by the communities. Hunter-gatherers, shifting cultivators, peasants, pastoral nomads, and artisans protested in various ways at the imposition of state control on their lives. In the colonial period, there were restrictions on hunting by people who were doing it mainly for food. It was part of their traditional nutrition. At the same time, hunting was encouraged and allowed as a sport for British officers and Indian royalty. Resistance to state forestry, conversion of natural forests to plantations of teak or sal continued throughout the British period. Local communities demanded that control of woodland must revert back to communal lands. Conflicts of interest between groups holding different values are also common in India. The Narmada Bachao Andolan was organized protest by several thousand people against as well as in favor of a series of large and small dams. The displaced were poor communities and farmers dependent on natural resources. They were protesting against the dams. But the supporters of dam were from urban areas and arid zones, and they hoped that water will increase industrialization. That is why they were in favor of the dam. In the 1950s, many large river valley projects were conducted in India. They started, but at that time there wasn't enough opposition to them because people did not know what will be the effects of these dams. But they had to endure the traumatic experience of displacement. Thousands were displaced because of these big projects. Today, if any large project comes up, whether it's a dam or road or industry, there is protest and very strong opposition because people have already experienced what it is going to do to them and to their environment. Today, the term displacement is slowly and consciously being replaced by the term resettlement in public discussions. But the effect is still the same. Corporate control over natural resources has led to many protests. The Chipko movement started against commercial failing in nearby areas. A wave of protest against commercial logging went through the Himalayan foothills. It was mainly led by Gandhian activists. It pointed out the contrast between subsistence use by people and commercial orientation by the industry. Very often, the state and industry have together conflicted with artisans and NTFP collectors. Reed workers in Kerala, bamboo workers in Karnataka, rope makers which were using wild grass in the Shivaliks of Uttar Pradesh have all struggled against government control. They felt that forest department was giving preferential treatment to the corporates and paper industry who demanded bamboo. But at the same time, they were not allowed bamboo for their regular use. Exploitation of tribal non-timber forest produce extractors and collectors was common. They were harassed by the forest department when they entered forest to collect the resources. They still collected it, but when it came to trading, the traders did not give them good price. In many areas, social activists worked with the tribals and tried to give them fair price for the collected forest produce. There was strong opposition to felling of natural forest to create industrially useful exotic tree plantations. The natural forest supplied people with many things, but the exotic trees which were planted instead of the forest did not give anything. Forest Rights Act was a historical step. It accepted the rights of the people to use the natural resources for their own livelihoods. However, its implementation is far from complete. We have looked at movements which basically started in developing countries. In the United States and Europe, scientists played a key role in environmental protection. Modern American environmentalism is supposed to start with a book by Rachel Carson known as The Silent Spring. In this book, she described how pollution has led to the fall of all ecosystems. This book led to ban on chemical pesticides in many areas. In India, journalists, Gandhian and environmental activists have all protested together. Today, there are protests against nuclear power plants even before they are built because the local communities know how it will affect their land and resources. There is a growing support today to environmental protection in the urban areas of India. But the urban Indian environmentalist is very influenced by the environmentalism of the Western countries, mainly the models in the America. International organizations in many cases actually supported exclusion of people from the forest areas. This was supposed to be the only way to conserve nature. At the same time, they supported tourism, which is a business in protected areas, even when the impacts of tourism, which are very bad, are well known. Urban environmentalism in India fails to take cognizance of different movements which were started by people within India. They fail to know that environmentalism is deeply rooted in the Indian cultures. Many people do not even know about the struggles of simple farmers, simple fishermen in protecting the environment. In many cases, environmentalism is seen to go hand in hand with vegetarianism or vegan habits. This started as a protest or opposition to commercial meat industry that converted forest to ranches in the American area. Organic and small-scale farming is also considered environmentally friendly activity. In India, meat is mainly from subsistence rearing of livestock. It supports farmers and landless people. We do not have any commercial farming of beef. Hence, Indian environmentalism need not support vegetarian or vegan foods. However, organic farming in India needs to be supported. In India, we always had organic farming, but it succumbed to the green revolution technology. Organic products are more expensive than the other products. Going organic is definitely a part of Indian environmentalism. The role of state agencies and private enterprise in environmental destruction needs careful attention. There is often direct action in terms of marches, tree hugging, which is vital component of environmental action in India. However, more recently, people are reverting to courts and laws and legal advocacy as a form of protest. In 1991, Indian economy started to liberalize. This led to dismantling of many state controls. Economic liberalization often was against environmentalism. Media was influenced by corporates. It often demonized local environmental leaders. They were seen as anti-development. The air pollution in all the cities is beyond control. Groundwater has reduced. There is devastation by open cast mining, and untreated waste is everywhere. The reasons for this destruction are mainly political apathy. There are high commercial interest in all resources, and there is lack of scientific assessment of what happens when such development takes place. Local communities have been alienated. There is rise in consumerism, and consequently there is exploitation of all things. We need to understand that without environment, humans cannot exist. There is no culture if there is no nature. It is necessary now to devise ways in which humans can coexist with nature. Answers can perhaps be found in the ethics of local communities. In this module, we looked at the different forms of environmentalism in India and in other countries. We talked about nature and culture coexistence. If you are interested in this subject, you can read the various books and papers given as a part of essential reading. You can also read the e-text which accompanies this module. Thank you so much for being with us.